So over to you, Larry. We're doing the fourth session, and this is a very interesting one. We've had a great response from Honduras, and he's going to talk about entrepreneurship and how he did some mentoring and how he said yes to God. So over to you, Larry. Tell us this wonderful story. And for those of you watching, we want you all to write us a comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us today. It's been a real pleasure sharing the story of how God has intervened in our lives. And today is a story about some mission works that I did down in Honduras. Carol went with me on a number of those trips. There was a local organization that started here calling Trading Jobs, and they started wanting to minister to developing countries to help in, raise the employment rates by helping entrepreneurs do better in their jobs, to be more profitable so they could hire more people. So my story today is how God prepared me for the work that I did in missions in Honduras. Well, on our first trip to Honduras, we went to a beauty shop, the very first visit, and we sat there for 1 hour and heard the lady tell us about how her business was failing and how terrible it was. And she was in business with a sister, and she wound up just crying, and it was painful to sit there and listen to it. And God spoke to me and said, "Tell her that she has a cancer on her business." And I thought, "Oh no, I can't say that." It's say that. I said, "You have a cancer on your business, and until you cut it out, nothing here is going to change." And she starts crying. I mean, she starts sobbing. And when
This was, by the way, Larry's first trip,
my first trip,
his first business to encounter. And so God is just like, boom, right away.
So I'm going to come back to the rest of that story. But on the way home from Honduras after that first trip, I was starting to think about, where did I learn the things that I was able to share with the people that were doing Honduras? I was really pleased with how much I was able to share with them, but I hadn't really thought about how I had learned these things. So I started making some notes. And the first note I made was about new shoes. And the story is, we lived in Dubuque, Iowa, my younger brother and I. I was going into second grade and he was going into kindergarten. And my mother took two of us downtown in Dubuque, Iowa, to J.C. Penney store to buy new shoes for school. We came back home and she said, "Larry, Keith, sit on the couch here. I want to talk to you." She said, "Now you listen to me. Your father had to work all day to buy those shoes for you, but you take care of them." And well into my adult life, whenever I thought about buying something, I thought, how long did I have to work in order to buy those shoes? Carol, it's your story.
Larry shared that with me, and I was teaching at the time, and I taught middle school, so I had 6 sections of classes each day. So I took my net pay, broke it down to how much did I earn per class. And I would too. I would look at something and say, how many classes did I have to teach in order to purchase that? And sometimes it would be, 12 or 15 classes, but it's worth it. Sometimes it would be 2 classes and it's not worth it. So, but it gives you a measuring rod and we've shared that with so many young people in terms of looking at the value of things.
Then when I was 10 years old, I went to the grocery store for my mother. This was before supermarkets, just a small little family grocery store, to pick up some items for her. And I remember, like it was yesterday, standing there in front of this candy rack. And there was a sign on the candy rack that said, "Candy bars, 5 cents each, 6 for a quarter." And I thought, wait a minute. If I bought 6 of those candy bars and sold them for a nickel a piece, I could make a nickel. So I rushed home and I said, "Mother, I want to open a candy store on our enclosed front porch." And she said, well, tell me about it. So I told her about the sign I saw, and I said, I can sell those. I know I can, and I will be able to make a little bit of money. And she said, well, I think that would be a really good experience. So on that day, Larry's Sweet Shop was born in Dubuque, Iowa. I wound up selling enough candy bars that I could go to a candy wholesaler and buy boxes of 24. I then paid my mother to make candy apples and divinity and fudge, sold that. I had a nice little business going. One of the problems was when I'd go off to school, the stragglers behind, mother would have to wait on them, which she did joyfully. The problem was it got to be the size that we went to bed at 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night at that 10 years old. I'd go to bed at 9 o'clock, and at 11 o'clock at night, the neighbors would call and say they were hungry. What kind of candy does Larry have? So it grew a little too fast and too big. So we finally stopped doing that. But it was a great learning experience for me about understanding cost and markup and how you relate to people and how you can add products of value to be able to be successful. Well, I also found out at a young age that life was not always fair. When I was a teenager, a friend of mine was Boy Scout, and back in the early 50s, they actually had Boy Scout cookies. Guys would go door to door selling them. And my friend asked if I could wanted to go along with him sell cookies, and I did. And it wound up, I sold more cookies than anybody else sold. And there was a prize, but they said, well, we can't give you the prize because you're not a Boy Scout. So I lost out on the prize, but I gained a lot of experience selling cookies. Uh, that didn't seem fair to me, but I certainly did understand it. My older sister said I was one of the cutest kids she ever saw. And I was really a cute kid until the hormones kicked in. And when I was a teenager, I became this gawky looking, awkward kid. And in junior high school, I really wanted to start dating. And I knew that I was going to have to do something in order to be able to track girls.
Junior high school?
Junior high school, yes. And I realized I needed to be the kind of person that other people wanted to be around. I needed to be friendly, happy, funny, compassionate, and a person that felt better when they were in my company than they had before. So I studied really hard. I read some books. The big book for me, the most one I can recommend is, of course, the Bible. There's two other books that I read that were life-changing for me. One of them is, maybe you've heard of this, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Norman Vincent Peale. And the other was The Power of Positive Thinking by Dale Carnegie. Both of those books are still available, and I recommend that to every young person to read to really understand what life is about and how you can go about it and how you can be a better person. Well, I really had a great time in high school. I dated a lot. I wound up announcing basketball and football games for my high school. Then after high school, went to college, went in the Navy. And when I was in the Navy, I was asked to be the captain of our ship's softball and basketball teams. At the time, I was a pretty good athlete, and I learned a lot about leadership and motivation in that time. When I came back home from the Navy, I went into business with an older brother. I started working with him, and the biggest thing I learned was how not to motivate people. And it was a great experience. And if you look at one of my former talks about, what was the name of the talk, Carol? Medical miracles. You can get a better idea of what I went through and what happened. But after that, Carol and I actually opened our own businesses where we had a workshop business and a consulting business. We went all across the United States, Canada, and England, teaching teachers how to teach science and math from a conceptual level rather than just rote learning. And I want to share with you a couple of things that I learned along the way that really helped me in business. There's a tremendous difference between coaching and mentoring. There are two ways to solve, and down in Honduras, we found that there was two ways for them to solve problems that they were having in their business. One was to add new products that had nothing to do with the product they were selling. Another was to open a new location. They had no idea what preventative maintenance was. Their cars, they ran until they broke, and then they tried to fix them. They didn't do anything with their buildings until they were falling apart. And down there, stop signs and street lights were just a suggestion. And all those things really helped me to be able to help them. But one of the, Carol?
I think a little elaboration there, the fact that they were always looking to expand before they had really developed a good foundation for where they were. And so that's what Larry's saying about, their business wasn't going well, so let's open another location. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. And the thing that I think is so critical to realize is that in this society, they did not grow up in a capitalistic society. And so some of the very basic principles of business or ways of thinking about how to do things just didn't exist in their minds. They just didn't have it. And so there is this difference between coaching and mentoring. And I won't spoil your story, but our sense of that was that mentoring, you come alongside, you guide, you ask a lot of questions, you pull the information out of people, help them to formulate ideas by guiding and directing and so on. Whereas coaching is just like, you really don't want to do that. No. Think about that again and say no. So there's telling somebody what to do, like a coach does on the field, or there's mentoring and coming alongside. And so it was interesting. And as Larry goes through his stories, you'll see those two things playing out together. Is interesting how people will respond to both of those things. And that sometimes coaching is absolutely necessary, whereas the preference is mentoring. The preference is to come alongside and take more time and have them develop their ideas themselves.
So I'll go back to where I started. On my second trip down, our first stop was the beauty salon that I had been to, where I told the woman she had a cancer on her business. And the person who started this ministry was along on that trip. And we were driving up there, and I said, I hope I really didn't, do wrong the last time I was down here. I said, I don't know whether I should have said the things I said in the way I said or not.
Which was coaching,
So-
not mentoring.
So we walked in the beauty shop, and she's standing there, and she said, you did it. I thought, oh Lord. And it turned out she was laughing then, and she said, you made me see what was wrong with my business. I bought out my sister. I have hired 4 more beauticians, which the sister did not want to do. She had also complained that she didn't want her son to come after school and sit in the corner and do her homework in the business. So she got rid of all of that. She hired the new people. She was becoming profitable. She added another chair in the beauty shop, and she was an absolute changed person. And I was very, very relieved that I hadn't really done some harm. She later on she partnered with a bridal shop, and they refer customers back and forth to get the brides all dialed up for their wedding. And the bridal shops recommend her to have the people go and get their hair. So it was a wonderful cooperation between those two businesses then.
And they ended up winning some awards.
They did. She wound up, I think it was a year later, won a local award for entrepreneurship in town. That was very, very comforting. I had a small part in that. I want to tell you the story about one of the most heartbreaking stories that we had. We had a gentleman that had a shop where he made furniture. This is a factory.
Beautiful furniture.
Very few furniture. When you went in, they had to. It was so crowded. They had to make aisles for you to walk in. There was sawdust everywhere. I don't understand how he could have made the beautiful furniture did in an area like that. If Occupational Safety Health Act, if that were down there, they'd have shut him down in a minute. There was sawdust, there was cords, there were no real aisles. And we tried to mentor him. One of the other mentors redesigned his entire factory and workflow, and that helped a lot. We tried to talk to him about getting insurance and reorganize his flow, and he was very against buying any insurance. Didn't understand at the time why, but he also had the employees, had a lot of work, so he sometimes had the employees come in and work in the evenings. His factory was located in a very high criminal area. And so what he would do is lock the people in the building and go home a few blocks away and let them work and then come back and then let them out. Well, one night they were busy and the workers said, well, we'd like to work again tonight. And the owner said, well, he said, I'm going to be across town tonight. Said, no, maybe that's not a good idea. So he said no to him. Well, that night, while the employees would have been working, the building burned down. And those men would have been locked inside that building. It destroyed his business. There was no loss of life. He lost everything. His inventory. He lost his accounts receivables, his accounts payables. One of my regrets is he had no computer backup, and that's something we hadn't insisted on. Carol?
Go ahead. I do have something to add. But...
Okay. And he said, we later talking to him and asking him about the insurance, he said, well, all that happens with insurance, you have something goes wrong, and then the lawyers get together and they don't pay you anything. So he had really no concept of insurance. And that was one of my regrets, that I didn't understand that and wasn't able to tell him how insurance worked. And also, I really felt bad that I hadn't insisted that he do something with backing up his computer. Because after the fire, he had no idea who he owed money to, who owed him money, and he was absolutely out of inventory. He did recover in business and started back up again. Later on, he had some other difficulties and he went out of business, but he did come back.
He had health difficulties that caused him to shut down. But the thing that was so impressive to me is that his name is Hector. Hector was probably one of the greatest men of God I have ever met. And he dearly loved his employees. He had a habit of actually hiring criminals, hiring people that had been in jail, and giving them work and giving them a new life. And so he had so much going for him in terms of his heart for God, his heart for his fellow man. And there was actually a picture of him, I wish we had it, that someone took the night of the fire. And when he came back to the site and watched his building burning down, the picture shows him having fallen to his knees, praising God that the men were not in there, that was such a guiding force that he did not allow them to stay. And any other night, he would have said, sure, go ahead, keep working. This night, he said no. And so it just shows the power of listening to the Holy Spirit and listening to that guidance and what it can mean if you don't.
Mhm, mhm.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
so we made about 4 trips a year for about 3 years. Carol went with me on a number of those. And we got to the point where the people that we had mentored then down there started mentoring other businesses. And it was really an honor to be a part of being able to start that ministry. Sherry,
one of the things that I think is really important about creating jobs as a ministry is when it first began and we were making these trips. Um, Again, we no longer have to make them because they became mentors themselves and we worked ourselves out of a job. But
Mm.
what was so good about that is that they were they were willing to listen. They were willing to learn. They did a lot in between the trips to educate themselves, to read books, to meet together and discuss their plans and uh, the pros and cons of different decisions they had made in their various businesses. And their businesses were all very different from one another. We talked to about 10 or 12 businesses each time we were down there. So it was a variety of situations, but all the business principles applied. But what I thought was so powerful about the way Creating Jobs handled it is that they did have us go down 3 to 4 times a year, which set in the idea of accountability and follow up. And it's you don't just go down once and say, okay, here are a few good ideas. Good luck. Hope it all works out for you. You come back and you say, okay, what have you done since the last time we were here? Have you met your goals? What are some things we can help you with? And that constant care over a period of time just made all the difference in the world.
There's a couple more businesses I'd like to tell you about. The one of the couples that we met down there had opened their own music school, and I want to think about this for a second. This is in Honduras. Education is very poor. Most people don't even graduate from high school, and they're opening up a music school for kids. There's no music in the schools, and the husband and wife were doing so. We went down and we introduced them to them. We were talking a little bit, and I said to him, I said, "Well, tell me about the first fight you had over your business." And they looked at each other and said, "How did you know?" I said, "Well, my wife and I were in business together, and I know." And
You two can probably relate to that as well.
and it was really very very funny, and a really great icebreaker. Another couple that we visited opened their own coffee shop and bakery. It was a lifetime dream of the wife. I will tell you, they had the best hot chocolate that I've ever tasted in my life. Um, I'll tell you one thing that I learned from them. They had a woman that would come into their store and buy a dozen rolls, and then a couple days later they would return it, and want their money back. What they found out is the woman was returning 10 instead of 12. So how do you handle that situation? Well, they had a great answer to that. So they obviously knew she was stealing. So the next time the woman came in and bought something, they said, "You're such a good customer of ours. Here, let me give you one of our pastries free of charge." That ended the stealing. I don't know that I'm smart enough to have come up with that, but it was really an amazingly great idea. The one thing about this particular couple, they both had full-time jobs. They had gone through some pregnancy problems. They had no time for themselves. They were having someone else run the store for them. They were not making money. So in a later trip, we went down, we walked in, and they got us our hot chocolate, and we sat down, and they said, "Well, we've got some good news for you." I said, "Well, what is that?" "We're going to open up a new location." I said, "Well, tell me about it." Said, "Well, there's a tourist area about 60 miles from here, and we think it'd be really good. We're going to have a bakery shop up there, bake the goods, and it's a high tourist area, and we think we can really turn things around." I looked at him, and I said, "Do not do this." He said, "What?" I said, "Do not do this." So I said, "Well, why?" And so I laid out for them all these different things about why that was such a bad idea. Well, the next trip down, we walked in, sat down, and I said, well, tell me, how's the new location doing? Well, you told us not to do that. And they had listened, they would have gone out of business. Instead, they opened kiosks around their own city and delivered items to them and were able to sell their goods that way. That was a way for them to expand a little bit without absolutely going broke.
Okay.
Creating Jobs is now an international ministry, and they're all over the world. Who is it they teamed up with, Carol?
They've teamed up with both Compassion and World Vision, and they're training young entrepreneurs through those organizations with a beautiful curriculum, a Christ-centered curriculum. Literally kids in late high school, early college age are learning from the curriculum and getting started in businesses on their own. All, like Larry said, all over. They have a strong presence in Africa now, several Central American countries, Haiti, Mexico. So they're really setting the world on fire.
I guess
Wow.
the
It
biggest
just
thing,
takes a seed and to sow, and look at that, how big it's grown. Wow.
I think
Congratulations.
the biggest thing we learned is that we take it for granted because we live in a capitalistic society that we know certain things. And what we found out is they did not know any of those things. And so that was an opportunity for really us to share our experience and our knowledge with them. And it was just wonderful to see their business grow, to hire more people, to keep the people off the streets, and become very successful business people.
Wow, wow.
I
Well, we
mean,
say there's a lot in bright side that none of us, we always want to take the glory and say, I did this and I did that. But really, it's a collaboration. Nothing is done by a single person, even though many times we want to take credit for something we've done. But really, it's many people getting involved and growing a seed that you sowed and sowed for God. So, congratulations on that. That's a great story. Now, if